welcome back to another episode of RoboReplay, and this one's going to be a little bit special as I did not have time to check out all the matches you guys submitted to me. Sorry about that, but I have finals that are coming up this week, as well as like exams, so I would not have had time to check out all the matches that you guys sent. But if you guys are looking at furthering your strategy knowledge and some interesting matches that were played, just go to my last video and check out the comments there. There were some really cool matches that I saw from there. However, what I do want to do this week is with DCMPs starting, some teams loading in today as well as some DCMPs loading in tomorrow, I did want to make sure that everybody was able to see like a full comprehensive guide of what happened over the course of the season and what I've covered over the course of the season all in one video, just as like a sort of smaller package version of the whole channel. So I'll be taking a look at a bunch of videos that were happening throughout all of Rescape, as well as looking at how you could qualify from district points and the 3 paths that there are to qualify to Worlds from district points, as well as what alliance selection might look like at your district champs. So starting off here, we are going to be taking a look at offensive strategy first, and if you're interested in a different topic, then I will have timestamps linked below, and you guys can scroll through the chapter to see what you're interested in and what you're not. So starting off here, we have offensive strategy, and we're going to be going back to the Ventura County Regional Final of High Tide and Rembrandts and looking at their lines and how they used algae. Let's go. So first off, High Tide immediately ends with an algae. This is their old robot, so the new robot has an arm to collect the algae. But let's see their strategy here. Right? And so there's 589 here is a very formidable defense bot. Did a great job against these guys. And one of the big things that High Tide does is punish 589 for going a little bit too far here. And so we talked about it before, but I'll talk about it again because I think it's good to bring up. So we see that the barge line is around here-ish, right? This big black line on the ground. So if High Tide's bumper goes in there and 589 is touching them, then there's going to be a penalty called on 589, right? So what High Tide does here, and what the best drivers in the world do a lot of when they're playing up against defenses, they try to bait defensive robots into playing too far and end up stealing foul points from them. So watch the line and watch what High Tide does here, right? So originally, they're just going to they're going to try to put up an algae. But as soon as they see 589 here, they drop their mechanism instantly and turn and see that 589's on them and say, come with us. We're going to rotate ourselves so that we get inside of that barred zone, and the head ref immediately is on that, calls a foul, and it's a free 6 points for High Tide. It's a great use of baiting defenders forward, as when defenders can't really see, for example, if a defender is on defending your coral station, for example, and they're hiding behind the reef and the drivers have no line of sight of where the heck they are, then it's an easy bait to like get someone to come forward because they're just like, okay, we'll just come forward towards you because we think we're okay, and then you just catch them out with a free penalty, free 6 points. And I do want to point out what High Tide does here with algae, right? I think this is going to be what the biggest thing that teams are going to be using algae for this upcoming week at District Champs is going to be using algae as a way to do anti-defense. And 125 did this later in the season 2 at the WPI District event. So we see that because High Tide is doing algae, at this point, 589 is kind of stuck with nothing to do. And they end up literally just sitting here and waiting for High Tide to just finish their algae cycle or before they go on to their next thing. And we could see that actually 5809 ends up like stalling some of their time, but it doesn't really matter as 5805 isn't going to be the one that's doing most of the scoring on this alliance. So we can see, right, that Rembrandts and High Tide both here are staggering their algae cycles so that 589 has literally no one to defend, as soon as they're like, okay, we're going to defend Rembrandts, the algae's up and gone, and Rembrandts is going for coral now, and you've completely outpositioned the defending robot. And then if they say, oh, well, we'll go for High Tide now, then High Tide's already there for an algae. So this idea of using algae cycles to stagger your cycles is a really, really great way to counter some defense in a way that you don't even have to outdrive them. You can just outthink them. I think it's a very good way to do it. And Rembrandt's here, right? Get in front for a coral, and then immediately we see 589 sitting here, waiting for Rembrandt's to come back, and I mean, there's just nothing to do. And High Tide is making use of the fact that 589 is on the other side of the field because Rembrandts took one coral and is now doing coral on their side. And 589 essentially just keeps getting bounced back and forth, and the robots are just choosing to do algae whenever they get defended, right? We see it again. High Tide stays inside their reef zone on purpose so that 589 hits them and they get a free 6 points. And it's just a great way to make sure that you're maximizing the points that you could get on offense, as well as minimizing the effect that defense has. And I think that this is the best way that you can do it. And this alliance with strategy is pretty good. However, I don't like the fact that 5805 is here. And as we'll see, like, this is an earlier match in the year. As we got further and further throughout the season, we saw that teams who were just doing coral and doing triple offense with coral didn't really start to work anymore, and teams were shifting their third robot to be much more algae heavy or defense heavy. But that is everything. One major thing that I would say that is not being shown here, that is in offensive terms, is that these guys are splitting the reef down the middle. What I've seen being used for deconfliction that's really, really helpful is if we split the reef down this line, right across here. And essentially what you do is you say, one of you guys is going to take the front hex, the left hex, and then the back right hex. And the other one's going to take the back here and here. And the reason that people do this is just because you can deconflict, right? Because let's say High Tide wants to score in this center piece in L4, and then Rembrandts also wants to score on their branch. Because, right, if you're splitting it down the middle, then at that point, you'd be cutting it like this, and so one branch would be here, one branch would be here. And let's say both of them want to go to the center branch. Now you're wasting time waiting for the other robot. So this just helps helps deconflict the entire situation by giving one robot the back side and one robot the front side. So in terms of anti-defense, right, as we've seen a lot of defense robots who are doing really good. We'll talk about defense later on in this video. But in terms of anti-defense, what you can do is, if you're getting full field defended, right, if there's a robot on you here, and you're trying to get in, and you want to go around them somehow, then one of the best things that I've seen being done is, if you don't think your drivetrain is faster than them, or you can't outspeed them, or outpush them, then one of the best things you can do is, when someone's bumper is on you, is back up, and then rotate around. Like, you swerve, and then rotate all the way around, and keep spinning around, because what ends up happening is, these guys end up left with nowhere to go. Maybe they can translate to you, but backing up and giving yourself that space allows you to get the speed necessary to completely speed past them, whereas these guys will have to accelerate either way depending on where you're going. And then the follow-up to this is, right, if the defensive robot is just really, really good and is able to match you, then at that point what you do is you back up and then bait one side, and then get the defensive robot to go one way, and then you can swing back the other way and then get around them. And then I think that this, you'll see if you watch more and more of the top teams where they're playing against really good defensive robots, you'll see more and more of baits and just psychological tricks that people do with their drivers. You'll notice it more and more as you watch teams, but this is one of the best ways to get around people, is to make them think you're going one way and just go double back the other way. And then you can improve on that, right? If you want to triple back or something, but at that point, I don't think it's really worth it. Just choose one way to go. But yeah, that's mostly everything I can think of with offense, and let's move on to checking out how, if you're looking to play some defense, what are some defensive strategies you can use to help your alliance at District Champs. So here we have the St. Louis Regional. We have Team Rush. This is the best form of open field defense I think I've seen the entire year. It is, I think, the most that you will ever see a robot do going into District Champs in terms of open field defense. So we'll watch Team 27 here, right? They are a very good, incredible offense robot. However, they break this match and end up going playing some defense, and they do a really good job in showing off everything you need to know about defense. So one of the biggest things here, we'll see them gunning, and immediately 94-1 is a ground intake robot. And they do a pretty good job of stopping them. And one of the ways that they do that is they use what I call defense fundamentals of bumper on bumper contact, right? Make sure one of your flat side bumpers is on their flat side bumper at all times. And then by doing this, they can't rotate around you because you can just move with them. And you'll always be pushing them against one side, but never pinning. And we see it again here, right? 94-1 tries to move to the side to score Coral. Rush is just translating with them. Unless your opponent is rotating, do not rotate. Just keep your flat side bumper on your flat side bumper, and you'll be good. And here, right, 27 gets into this area of maybe we could get a penalty. And I think that going into the reef zone is perfectly fine as long as two conditions are met. One, there's no offensive robot near you. In this case, 4500 isn't really near enough where 27 wouldn't be able to just get out of the way and not get penalized. Because if, for example, 4500 was here, they just go here and they get a free foul on you. And the other condition is that the back of your bumper, whichever one is going to get pushed up against that reef station, the back of your bumper is going to end up square against it. Because if it's not square against it, then and you have a corner that's on one of the flat edges of the reef, then what will end up happening is this robot will just rotate themselves around or maybe just translate themselves over while still touching you, and they'll end up like this, get a free foul on you, and then you're cooked. But instead, Rush realizes this, right, and then they're going to fall back over all the way to the side and do a great job of getting out of the potential penalty that could be incurred. And then if you do decide to do on the reef defense, one of the biggest things to do is do not overplay your situation when you are near here, right? If one robot gets past you, that it is okay to fully reset, and we'll see that Rush actually gets punished for this here, where they say, oh, we can defend this robot as they're going in, don't realize their positioning is a little bit too close to the reef, and then ended up getting called for a foul over here because they touched 4500 while they were in their own reef. So make sure you're resetting fully, make sure you have an idea of how much space you have to play with when you're doing defense on the reef zone and open field defense in general, as it is really, really risky. And then, again, we see from Rush a great job here of trying to put flat bumper on flat bumper. Unluckily, Rush predicts that 9401 would go towards themselves, but 9401 decides to go this way, so that's what happens here, right? You see that Rush goes flying to the other end while 9401 gets it for free. And great reaction by Rush. They are immediately back to defending the funnel robot, or not funnel robot rather, but a robot that's on the coral station. And so all the techniques that we talked about here before can be applied to funnel station robots, but if you're not playing against a ground intake robot, I would suggest try to do more of a defend the funnel rather than doing open field defense, as open field defense is really, really hard, and it's really just very, very risky in general if you're not fully confident in what you're doing. So this, I think, is the best thing you can do, and it's what Rush is going to show off here. And what's going to be happening is Rush is going to set up here on the reef, towards the coral station and towards the reef, but somewhere in the middle. And the reason that they do this is they want to give themselves space from the side walls, right, on both sides here. They have space from the side walls. So what this means is that when 4500 ends up running into them and they're pushed over here, there's not going to be a pin called because the space is going to be in between here. And this will allow Rush to just move back and forth, stay with the defending robot, and just completely deny them of any points they're going to try to get. And I think that this positioning here is exactly how you should be playing all of your funnel interactions once someone gets the coral. And the way that normally you'd end up in this situation is that you'd be defending someone and they'd get past you. And I think one of the best things you can do at this point, right, if someone gets past you and they're collecting a coral, is I've seen too many robots try to just push down and just try to knock these guys over, but it doesn't really make sense, as if a robot has a funnel, for example, in this case, there is a funnel right here, right? So that coral's likely going to go into the robot anyways, and I think you'd have a much better time denying points by just leaving this area, going to around where Rush is sitting right now, and then just completely defending them from there instead of trying to hit downwards. And Rush does a great job here, right? Flat bumper to flat bumper. 4500 tries to rotate to no avail, and then Rush does end up getting caught a little bit. They go a little bit too far downwards, predicting where 4500 is going to go, get caught out for it, and now 4500 has their bumper corner ahead of Rush, so they should be able to get out scot-free. And we see that, yeah, they are basically able to do exactly that. And so I think this is the best way that you're going to play open defense, right? If you're not going to be able to get yourself pushed all the way against here, then this is the most you'll be able to do, is just try to translate with an offensive robot up and down. But if you're playing against a final robot, then this is not where you're going to get most of your defensive value. Most of your defensive value is going to come from the fact that you will be sitting here and you will be just denying points by just sitting here and making the other two robots cycle through here. And most of your defensive value is going to come from just going back and forth through the stations, ping pong defense. So if you're sitting in the coral station, right, one of the biggest things to note is that you want to always be in the middle of the coral station, as when robots try to come against you, they'll have to take a path, right? They have to either go from the side of you, or they have to push against you and give you a free pin count and make themselves run away from their own coral station. So they'll come to one side of you, right? And as soon as you see which side they're going to, you can immediately start heading towards that side and lean towards that side, and then be able to just completely match them. And essentially what it'll end up looking like is, if they go left side, then you're now left side on left side, flat bumper, and they're pinning you, and they have to back up again. Or if they go right side, then you're over here, and then they're flat bumper, and they try to get around here, and you could just translate over. And you have a much shorter path than they do to get inside, as they have to go all the way out through here, whereas to block them, you just have to go straight. Right. So it's much, much, much easier to just try to play on this by just sitting in the middle and just translating left and right to try to deny coral. That is to do open field defense in general. But once they get past you when you're denying coral, that's when you want to play open field defense, as well as if a robot decides that they're just going to leave and head over towards the other coral station. And this is another situation in which if you see a robot leaving, you should just be gunning over there to try to get in front of them. Right? You don't want it unless you're really, really, really fast. There's no world in which a robot on offense that is decided to go this way is not going to make it before you do, but as a reaction to them going over there. So if you are deciding that you want to move over because you see two offensive robots on this side, for example, right? And you want to go over, then my suggestion would be go over and play some more open field defense here, and then back yourself up and put yourself back in the coral station. And just continue to make both offensive robots actively go from one side to the other, back over, because every time they do that, it's just more and more and more time and cycles that are being completely wasted. A final thing I'll talk about by defense is the endgame defense, and I think that we talked about this like week 1 is like the idea of if you only take one penalty and deny one climb, it is technically worth it if you don't have a deep climb that you could hit. And I think one of the best ways to do this is by just having a robot come over here, right? Leave your post at coral defense at around, like, let's say 35, 25 seconds. This should be done with pre-scouting, right? See how long your opponents take to climb and go a little bit before then. And what you do is you sit here and you'll scare the crap out of these guys, because these guys will all look at you and be like, wait, they're not defending us because they're defending our climbs. Wait, we have to go earlier? And then you force them to now, one, you've scared them into thinking that they might miss their climb, and so you've made them leave coral cycling in favor of going earlier for their climb. And two, you're now sitting here, and if they have, for example, if they have a climber where it's like the little prong ones forward, where the cage gets caught in the middle, then if they're doing that with their robot over here, right, and they're trying to get the cage to rest neatly in the middle of here, then what you can do is you can just play some open field defense, right, bump them around a little bit, move a little bit left and right, but then turn, let them through, and they'll be gunning forward, right, because they're going to be trying to push past you to try to get a foul. And then they gun forward, get let through, hit their own cage all the way up. That cage is now unusable depending on the climber that they have. And perhaps maybe you get both robots to do this, and you've now effectively denied a climb without getting any penalty points at all. And then you could just go zip over, get a corner park. Or if you're feeling really, really risky, and you don't really want to waste the time, or you think you don't have the margin to let them score coral for free in the time that you'd just be sitting over here, then you can go really late. Like, as you see one robot score a coral, you can just gun it over here and play, like, much, much deeper. And just effectively risk you hitting a cage, hitting a foul point, but also potentially completely nullifying both climbs entirely while also getting rid of the coral cycles that you'd be missing by going over here a little bit earlier. That's everything for defense, so let's move on to how I think alliances are going to be crafted at the top level. So here I have a spreadsheet of just using data that I've collected throughout the season, just average total points as well as average auto and telly to try to predict how a alliance selection might go in different divisions in the New England District Championship. And so what I think might happen here is that most teams are going to end up choosing at least in the 1 to 4 alliance area, right? And honestly, probably to the 5 and 6, or maybe the 6. We'll see just coral robots, picking coral robots from 1 to 4. I think that coral is just too valuable. You need a good coral robot that early, and I think you'll have the best choice possible for those alliances. So I think that you'll see coral and coral getting picked from 1 to 4. I think that 5 also might just end up sticking with a coral strategy, but depending on your field, I would not be that shocked if Alliance 6, maybe Alliance 7 and 8 particularly, decides to say, we're going to pick a coral robot, or we're going to be a coral robot as a captain, and we're going to pick an algae robot second. And the reason that we do that is because we think that, for example, in this situation, if we look at 2342, the next pick that they'd probably get for coral would be 3781 in terms of coral points. And then the other pick they have is 39.7. And so if you value the idea of having an algae robot and not letting 8th Alliance take it from you, then you might pick an algae robot a little bit higher than you would normally, just to confirm that you'd actually get the algae robot instead of letting them fall. And then you have your second coral scorer being like a lower coral scorer overall, but still somewhat decent enough so that you can run a triple offense strategy. And I think that Alliance 8 and 7, if they're going to get upsets, it's going to have to be through a triple offense strategy. And I think that 5 and 6 as well, depending on the depth of the field, might also have to go to the triple offense strategy. But depending on how deep your field is, you might be able to get away with a 2 offense, 1 defense strategy. Depending on how deep your field is, and 2, how good that defensive robot is. Because if you're going to go with a 2 offense, 1 defense strategy at 5 or 6, you got to be really, really confident in both the 2 robots that are going to be scoring coral, as well as that defensive robot that they're going to literally lock down Alliance 1 completely. But then at that point, I think that Alliance 5 and 6, you could go either way. But I think that 1 to 4, I would doubt that these guys will be taking robots for coral at all. I think that most robots aren't going to be taking coral at the second pick anyways. I think that for Alliance 1 to 4, the best strategy is 1, you go 2 offense, 1 defense, or you go triple offense with a twist, where instead of it being triple offense conventionally, you instead have it where you have 2 coral scorers and then 1 algae stealer, right? You have 1 algae, but not in the way that these guys are doing it, where these guys are just having their algae robot play on their side, but you have an algae robot who is going to the other alliance, and they're taking it off the ground, and they're just putting it in their barge, and they're just taking so many maximum points away from you. As if you're really good, and you trust your 2 partners as coral scorers to like completely lock down your coral score, then I think that denying points from the other team with algae is going to be a really big thing to do in this game, especially at the highest levels of play that we'll be seeing before Worlds. So that's how I think that you might see alliance selection play out. I think that if you're a robot that thinks that you can't really break through the Alliance 1 to 4 level of being the best coral scorer, but you want to get a bunch of district points for playoffs, I think that one of the best ways you can do that is by, hopefully, depending on your field, right, you get picked as an algae robot maybe, and you're able to have a triple offense strategy that completely just blows up all the other 4 alliances above you, 4 to 7, and then maybe you can pull out some upset wins against 1, 2, or 3. But if you're not looking to do that, and you think you don't have an algae mechanism, for example, then I think that the only way that people are going to get selected for not doing algae after the first round has ended, right? So we've gone through all the captains and we've gone through all the pick ones, is just going to be defense. At that point, no one really cares about your coral score. After Alliance 8, first pick, maybe, and no one's going to be really looking at you for a coral score. So if you're looking to get on these alliances, I would say, one, if you aren't able to break through into a captain or pick one spot through coral, I'd just say focus on algae. You'll probably get picked if you could just do a decent amount of algae, depending on your field, or try to show off your defense so that you can get picked by a higher alliance in 1 to 4. Now, let's check out a breakdown of district points in the New England region at least, and how I think teams might be able to qualify for Worlds and the 3 paths there are to doing that. Alright, so I just have a spreadsheet of all the district points that were happening in the New England region over the past 2 years. 2022 was a little of a bit of an edge case due to how COVID worked at that point, so we won't be looking at that year. But we'll be looking at these 2 years to see how teams have been qualifying to Worlds in the past, and I think the 3 paths that you can use to get there. And the first one, pretty straightforward, don't really need much explaining. Be really, really good. If you're just really good and you're able to just win district champs as like a number 1 captain or like whatever captain of alliance you are, then yeah, you'll qualify to Worlds. That's normally how it works. The amount of the multiplier on district champs when points really, like, if you're able to win as a captain, it truly does not matter. You could probably get 0 points for the entirety of the rest of the year and somehow qualify to DCMP. If you did that, you'd probably still make it to Worlds if you won. So like 80-13 here with their 79 of raw district champ points would have qualified to Worlds even if they did not have any of these first 2 district points numbers at all. So yeah, district points at DCMP are incredible. So if you're able to just win it outright, go for it. That's one path to Worlds. You're good. The other path, I think, that's more obvious. That's like shown to people. Is when you see teams that are like 5112, for example, or 1729, where maybe they didn't have the greatest district events earlier on, but they made it to DCMP, and at DCMP, they didn't have to be ranked great, right? You see 45-24, but they were picked low in 21-25. They were picked pretty low, so they were picked on a high alliance second pick and did really, really good as a second robot and ended up placing really high. And then through there, because they had a decent amount of points earlier, as well as the multiplier, 49-45, you end up making it to Worlds because of just the amount of points that you get from winning district champs. Right? So that's the other way you do it. I think, like, being a second robot on a really good alliance, but also that requires you to win, or at least finalist, as we saw from 34-64 here, right? They were able to get second picked on a really good alliance. Or sorry, they were able to get second picked on a really good alliance, ended up finalisting and qualified because their first 2 district events were pretty good, even though they didn't win the whole thing, or have a really incredible ranking, in terms of where they got picked. And the third option, I think, is the hardest option to predict. And that is if you're in like the middle of the pack, throughout all your district events, like 1153, permanently in purgatory of never winning a blue banner, even though they're always incredible. They did great at their first event, did great at their second event, and then weren't able to do incredible in playoffs, but ranked really good, were picked pretty high, and through that, just because they had so many district points, they're able to sneak in. But one of the worst things about this type of method of just sneaking in is that look at where they ended up on the list, right? They were about 13 district points away from not qualifying to Worlds. So, for example, if you didn't get an award, or if you were boosted by an award at some point, but then you didn't get that award, maybe that's the difference between you qualifying to Worlds and you not qualifying to Worlds. And it's really, really hard to be that type of team because it's constantly like you need to win every single award to maximize your points, because if you don't win in playoffs, then it's very likely that other teams are going to jump you, even though you might be a better robot technically scoring-wise. So, just to recap, the 3 paths are be good, but be incredibly good. Like, ridiculously good. And that's really hard, obviously, for most teams, so it doesn't apply to most teams. But if you're trying to qualify to Worlds and you're able to be a pretty strong offensive robot in the events you've went to, you have a pretty strong collection of district points so far, you could, depending on what the cutoff ends up being for your region, you could be good, but slightly not as good. Not as good. Right? You're not winning the entire event, but you're getting ranked high, you're getting picked high, and you're doing a great job with your district points before, so it's okay because you get DCMP is really just a boost to get you in, rather than like a final end-all be-all to get you into Worlds. And the final path is get picked by someone good in the second pick. And when teams get picked by someone good, it's been a very often occurrence of people saying, oh, well, they didn't deserve to make it to Worlds because they weren't the highest scoring robot. Why are we sending them to Worlds, even though they only got picked by this alliance? But getting picked by an alliance that's high is a very hard thing to do, and it requires very specific things to happen on your end. So, like, for example, if 5112 decide to say, well, we think we're gonna be a Coral robot and do only Coral, and we're not going to show any defense in all of Quals, and their goal was to qualify to Worlds as a second pick, then your strategy in matches isn't aligning with what you want to do as a team to qualify to Worlds. Which is why I think that looking at these three options, seeing where you think you lie, is really, really helpful for trying to see your way to qualify for Worlds. And seeing which three of these categories do you fall into? Do you have enough district points for the events you've went to already where you think you can sneak in by being even good enough with like an 8th Alliance first pick and with some good Reiki points? Or do you think you need a really big boost of district points, in which case maybe you want to try to attempt to be a really good second pick and a really strong second pick for a top alliance and just win the event that way? And if you're just incredibly good, you're gunning for first captain anyways. We all know what you're doing. It's not really that complicated. But yeah, that was the breakdown of most strategies that I saw this season, everything that I thought was really important to mention. Good luck at District Champs. I hope this helped you out. This is another episode of RoboReplay, and thank you.